I sat there at the dinner table, trying to savor the warm comfort food my mom had spent hours preparing. The chatter around me was pleasant enough, but something was gnawing at my insides. I could feel it, a storm brewing beneath the surface of what seemed like a normal evening. You know, my dad said between bites, we were talking, and we think it's time for Grandma and Grandpa to move in with you. I froze. My fork hovered halfway to my mouth as I processed the words. Grandma and Grandpa? Move in with me? My heart raced, and a sick feeling settled in my stomach. Excuse me? I managed to say, keeping my voice level. What do you mean? They're getting older, and it's harder for them to manage on their own. It's just temporary, of course, until they get settled, my mom chimed in, oblivious to the sudden tension building in the room. We thought it would be easier if they stayed with you. It makes sense, doesn't it? I didn't say anything. I couldn't. My mind was racing, but I stayed calm on the outside, smiling politely. What were they thinking? They couldn't just dump my grandparents on me. My apartment was mine, my sanctuary. I had just moved into this trendy two-bedroom place, and I had worked hard to make it exactly how I wanted. I had just started running a small Airbnb business out of the spare room. The idea of my grandparents living here, with their outdated furniture and the constant stream of back-in-my-day stories, it was a nightmare. I nodded along, pretending to be okay with it. Sure, I'll think about it, I said, forcing a smile, but my stomach was in knots. I needed to figure out how to handle this. The night passed slowly. Everyone seemed so certain about it, my mom, my dad, even my younger sister, who was already imagining all the cute moments she'd get to have with Grandma and Grandpa. But all I could think about was how my carefully crafted space was about to be invaded. The next day, I got to work. I had to act fast. My Airbnb business was my lifeline, and I couldn't let this family emergency ruin everything. I spent the evening cleaning up the spare room, stripping away any trace of its original purpose. I removed all the personal touches I'd added to make it cozy, no more paintings or framed photos. I made it look more neutral, like a generic hotel room, in case anyone happened to show up. I didn't tell my parents about the changes. I figured I'd play along, let them think I was all in on this, while secretly making my space completely unwelcoming for the elderly couple. I started drafting listings for other potential renters. I'd make sure they wouldn't have anywhere else to stay. The day they were supposed to arrive, I got a text from my mom, we're dropping off their things. Don't worry, we've already talked to the movers. I almost couldn't believe it. The audacity. My heart pounded as I realized the moment had come. I was ready. The movers showed up early, and my parents came in behind them, beaming with pride. We brought everything they'll need, my mom said, walking in like she owned the place. My dad, still smiling, added, you know, it's just a little while. A few weeks, tops. Just to help them out. I didn't say a word, just led them to the spare room, where they started unloading boxes. My grandparents' things filled the space, old chairs, mismatched dishes, blankets that smelled like mothballs. I gritted my teeth, watching them fill the room with clutter. But I was patient. I waited. The movers left. My parents gave me a kiss on the cheek, reassured me that everything would be fine, and left me alone with the mess they'd just deposited into my life. That night, as I lay in bed, I got a notification on my phone. A new booking. A week-long stay. A couple looking for a quiet place to unwind. The timing couldn't have been better. My grandparents were about to move in, but I already had a guest coming for the next week. I smiled to myself. This was going to be interesting. The next morning, just as my parents were about to check on my grandparents' progress, I told them I had an emergency meeting I couldn't miss. I left my apartment, locking the door behind me, leaving it all to unfold without me. Later that evening, I checked in on my Airbnb guests. They were happy with the place, everything was perfect. And back at my apartment, my grandparents were still trying to settle in, unaware that I had already transformed their supposed new home into a temporary hotel. When I finally called my parents that night, I made sure to sound calm. "Hey, so everything's going well here," I said, "but, it seems like Grandma and Grandpa might need a little more space. You know, for the long haul." They didn't get it. They thought I was just being overly dramatic, but I could see their hesitation. And I couldn't stop smiling. In the end, they had no idea how far I was willing to go to maintain my own little piece of freedom. A few days passed, and the whole situation felt like a delicate balancing act. My grandparents were still under the impression that they were just temporarily staying with me, but my Airbnb guests were coming and going, filling the space I had intended to rent out. It was all working perfectly, except my parents were getting suspicious. "Hey, I've been trying to reach you," my mom said over the phone one afternoon, her voice tinged with concern. "Is everything all right with the room? We thought you were going to make the house more comfortable for them. We know they have a lot of stuff, but they can't just leave everything in boxes." I could feel the pressure mounting. I had to come up with a reason why they couldn't just stay indefinitely without revealing my plan. I needed to hold my ground without raising any red flags. "Mom, I swear, it's all good," I said, trying to sound casual. "But I've already got a couple of guests staying here this weekend. The room's pretty much fully booked for the next few weeks, so it might be a bit cramped for Grandma and Grandpa." I heard silence on the other end of the line. It was the kind of silence that made my pulse quicken. Then came her response, a little too measured. "Oh, right. Well, that's something we didn't realize. But they really can't stay anywhere else. I'll call them and talk to them." I was starting to feel the heat, but I kept my cool. "Take your time. I just want to make sure everything's set up right. They'll be fine." I hung up the phone, heart pounding in my chest. This was starting to feel like a tightrope walk, but I was determined not to let them move in. My grandparents' arrival had been the catalyst, but it was clear they weren't going to just leave, especially not with all their things already piled in my spare room. The next day, I got a message from one of my regular Airbnb renters, a couple, just like the last ones, who had booked for a week. But this time, they were coming for longer. The message was clear: they loved the place and wanted to extend their stay. I sent a quick text to my grandparents, who were still sorting through boxes. "Hey, I've got another booking for this weekend. I'll need the room ready by Friday." They didn't reply immediately, but I could hear the frustration in the way they shifted their things around when I got back home. Then, my parents arrived unexpectedly. "Hi. We were in the area and thought we'd drop by and see how everything's going," my mom said, smiling as if everything were perfectly normal. I almost choked. Of course, they'd come by unannounced. I led them in, trying to keep up the illusion that this was all just a misunderstanding. But as soon as my mom stepped into the room, I saw the look in her eyes. She stopped in her tracks, staring at the sparse, minimalist setup I had carefully orchestrated. There were no grandparent chairs, no old quilts, no heirloom cabinets that I knew would have filled the space. Instead, the room was pristine and used. "Where's all their stuff?" my dad asked, glancing around, perplexed. "Oh, well, I had to rearrange," I said smoothly. The room was a bit too small for all the old furniture, so I cleared it out to make space for future guests. They're staying in a guest room now, and I'm handling the bookings. They looked at me, confused. "Bookings? What do you mean? I thought you said it was just temporary. What happened to making them comfortable?" my mom pressed. I took a deep breath. This was it. I had to face the music now, but I wasn't about to back down. "I'm sorry, but this arrangement isn't working out. I need the room for my guests, and I've already committed to Airbnb bookings. There's just no space left for them." My dad's face turned a shade of red I hadn't seen in years. "You're turning your own grandparents away?" He spat. Look, I didn't ask for this, I replied, the pressure finally boiling over. I love Grandma and Grandpa, but I can't sacrifice my livelihood to accommodate them. This is my home. It's not meant to be a permanent shelter for everyone. And frankly, I need this space to make my business work. The silence that followed was deafening. I could see the disappointment in their eyes, but I stood firm. I had a business to run, and I wasn't about to let my parents guilt-trip me into giving up everything I had worked for. After a long pause, my mom finally spoke. I never thought you'd turn your back on family like this. She shook her head and turned to leave. My dad followed without saying another word, both of them clearly upset. I stood there, feeling a strange mix of guilt and relief. I knew I had crossed a line, but I also knew I had to protect what was mine. I couldn't let anyone, no matter who they were, take that from me. As the door shut behind them, I sat down on the couch, feeling the weight of the decision settle in. But as I checked my phone for the next Airbnb booking, I couldn't help but smile. Life was about to get a whole lot more interesting. The next few days passed in a blur. My parents didn't call, didn't text. It was like they were giving me the cold shoulder, and I wasn't sure if I was relieved or guilty. The tension was palpable, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I had made the right choice. I had my life and my business to think about, and that meant drawing some hard boundaries. But then, things took a turn I didn't expect. One evening, as I was prepping the spare room for a new guest, the doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone. My stomach dropped as I peeked through the peephole. It was my grandparents. I opened the door, my smile forced. Hey, what's up? I asked, trying to sound casual. Grandma's eyes were red, and her usually warm face was creased with worry. Grandpa stood behind her, looking uncomfortable and lost in his own thoughts. We didn't want to make things harder for you, sweetheart, Grandma said softly, but we really don't have anywhere else to go. Your mom said this was just temporary, but now we're not sure what to do. I froze, my mind scrambling for words. I couldn't let them in. Not with the Airbnb guests arriving tomorrow. I had no idea what to say. I didn't know you were coming by, I stammered, trying to make excuses. This really isn't a good time. I have a guest coming in tomorrow, and the place is a bit packed. Grandpa nodded, rubbing his hands together nervously. We understand, kiddo. We didn't mean to impose. We just thought maybe you'd let us stay for a little while, like you promised. The guilt hit me like a wave, crashing against every wall I had put up. I looked at their tired faces, and for a moment, I almost cracked. But then I remembered why I'd gone to such lengths. This was my home. My space. My business. Look, I said, trying to sound calm but firm. I get that you need help, but this situation isn't working out. It's not just about the space, it's about what's fair to me. I have commitments with my guests, and I can't just push that aside. Grandma's face fell, but she didn't argue. Grandpa, however, raised his voice a little. You're turning us away, just like that? After all we've done for you? This is how you repay us? His words stung, but I stood my ground. I'm not turning you away. I'm just trying to keep things running smoothly. This is how I make my living. I could see the hurt in their eyes, but I couldn't give in. They were silent for a long moment, neither of them saying anything, just standing there at the doorstep. Finally, Grandma broke the silence. I never thought you'd choose money over family. Her words cut deep, and I swallowed hard. I hated that she was right. This felt like betrayal, but in my gut, I knew I had no other choice. I'm sorry, Grandma. I wish there was another way, but there isn't. They lingered a moment longer, then turned and walked away, their footsteps heavy on the stairs. As the door closed behind them, I felt a strange mixture of relief and regret, but mostly, I just felt numb. The next day, I was preparing for the new guest when I received a text from my mom. "We need to talk," it read. I stared at the screen, my heart racing. I hadn't expected this. My mind raced, but I forced myself to focus. I had to figure out how to navigate this without losing everything I had worked for. I replied, trying to keep it casual. "Sure. What's up?" She didn't waste time with pleasantries. "Grandma and Grandpa came to see you yesterday. They told me everything." I could feel the tension in her words. "I'm really disappointed in you," she continued. "You're acting like this is some kind of business transaction, but family comes first. You need to figure out what's more important." I took a deep breath, trying to keep my emotions in check. "I've made my decision, Mom. This is my home, and I'm running a business here. I can't put everything on hold for Grandma and Grandpa. I've tried to make it work, but it's just not feasible." There was a long pause before she responded, and when she did, her words were colder than I had ever heard them. "I just don't understand you anymore. You've changed." The message hit me hard, more than I expected. I stared at the screen for a while, my mind racing. Was I really that different now? Was I becoming the person my parents feared I would? A selfish, cold-hearted business owner with no room for family? I sat there for a long time, the silence in the apartment deafening. When the buzzer rang, I snapped back to reality. I had guests to greet. They were here for a relaxing weekend, and I had to make sure everything was perfect. I opened the door, forced a smile, and greeted them. But inside, the guilt lingered. I had made my choice. And now, I had to live with the consequences. The next few days blurred together in a haze of bookings, cleanings, and messages. My Airbnb was running smoothly, but my personal life was a different story. I barely heard from my parents, but I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't over. I knew that they were upset, but what could I do? I had made my choice, and it had to stick. The guests were great, quiet, respectful, easy to please, but there was something missing. Something that I couldn't quite place. The air in the apartment felt heavier somehow, like the space I had worked so hard to make perfect was now a little emptier. Every time I passed by the spare room, I was reminded of what I had chosen over my family. On the third day, I received a text from an unknown number. It was brief, but it was enough to make my heart skip a beat. *I think it's time we talk about this. Grandma. *I felt my throat tighten. Grandma. She never texted me like that. I stared at the message, trying to decide if I should respond. I didn't want to. I didn't know how to. But the guilt that had been eating away at me ever since they left started to consume me again. What was I really doing? I was losing my family over a business. After a few minutes of agonizing back and forth, I typed a simple response, *, can we talk later? I'm working right now. *, I sat there staring at my phone, waiting for the response. What would she say? Was she angry? Would she ask me to come to my senses? The longer I waited, the more I realized just how much I didn't want to face what I had done. But part of me knew I had to. This wasn't just about the spare room anymore, it was about the space in my heart that I had closed off from everyone I loved. The reply came within minutes. *, I think we need to clear the air. You've been avoiding us for days. *, I swallowed hard, putting my phone down. It was time. I couldn't keep running from this. I had to face my decisions, even if it meant everything would change. That evening, after my current guests had left for dinner, I texted her back, *, I'm free now. Where should we meet? *, she didn't waste any time with the details. *, your place. We're coming over. It felt like a punch to the gut, but I knew there was no way out. I couldn't avoid them forever. I knew what was coming, and I didn't like it, but it was inevitable. About an hour later, the doorbell rang. I stood up, my heart racing in my chest. I checked the clock right on time. I opened the door slowly, bracing myself for whatever was about to unfold. Grandma and Grandpa stood there, their faces serious, but not angry. There was sadness in their eyes, deep, unspoken sadness. They didn't say anything at first, just stepped inside. Grandma lingered by the doorway, looking around at the apartment, while Grandpa moved to the living room, sitting down slowly. "We need to talk about all of this," Grandma said softly, her voice almost breaking. "But first, I want you to know something. This isn't just about the room. It's about you. We always thought you'd be the one to help us when we needed it. But now, I'm seeing a side of you that I didn't expect." Her words stung. I could feel my chest tighten, but I couldn't let it show. "I'm sorry, Grandma. I really am," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "But I made a choice. This place is my livelihood. I'm building something here." Grandpa spoke up from the couch, his voice low but firm. "You're building something, all right. But at what cost? We never asked for much, but we always thought you'd be there when we needed you most. You've built walls around yourself, and we're not sure you even realize it." His words hit harder than I wanted to admit. I had built walls, hadn't I? To protect my space, my business, my independence. But in doing so, I had pushed the very people who cared about me the most to the outside. The weight of that realization hung heavily in the air. Grandma walked over to me, placing her hand on my arm. "You don't have to choose between us and your business. We never asked you to sacrifice everything for us, but we did ask for your support when we needed it. And that's what hurts the most, sweetheart." I wanted to say something, anything, to make it right. But I couldn't find the words. How do you explain to someone that you're just trying to survive in a world that's too expensive, too competitive, and too overwhelming? How do you explain that the choices you made were driven by fear? After what felt like an eternity of silence, Grandma sighed, stepping back. "We won't stay, not if you really don't want us here. But you need to think about what you're willing to lose for the sake of a business. Family is worth more than any booking." They didn't wait for me to respond. Grandpa stood slowly, and with one final look at me, they turned and left, the door clicking shut behind them. I stood there for a long time, the weight of their words sinking in. The apartment felt emptier now, more hollow. The space I had worked so hard to make my own suddenly felt like a cage. Was it really worth it? As I sat down on the couch, my phone buzzed with a new booking confirmation. Another guest. Another weekend full of strangers passing through. But as I stared at the screen, I couldn't shake the feeling that something in me had changed. And maybe, just maybe, it was time to rethink what I was really building. The days after Grandma and Grandpa left felt like I was walking through a fog. I had my Airbnb business to focus on, sure, but everything else felt distant. I had convinced myself that I was doing the right thing, that my decisions were just part of growing up and carving out my own path. But in the quiet moments, I couldn't shake the image of Grandma's sad eyes or Grandpa's disappointed face. It haunted me in ways I hadn't expected. I continued to host guests, but the excitement I once felt when I saw a new booking come in had faded. I went through the motions, cleaning, preparing, checking in on guests, but it wasn't the same. My apartment, once a place of comfort and independence, now felt like a hollow shell. I was filling the space with people who came and went, but there was no warmth left. Then, one evening, as I was finishing up a long cleaning session after my guests left, I heard a knock on the door. My first instinct was to ignore it. Maybe it was a delivery or someone in the building who had the wrong apartment. But then I heard it again, 3 firm knocks. Something in my gut told me to answer. When I opened the door, I was shocked to see Grandma and Grandpa standing there. "Hey," I said, trying to hide the surprise in my voice. "What's going on?" Grandma looked tired, but there was something in her eyes now, something different from the sadness I had seen before. Grandpa, as usual, was quiet, but I could tell he was bracing himself for something. We thought we should check on you, Grandma said softly, her voice almost tentative. We've been thinking about what you said, and we realized we were too quick to judge. Maybe you're right. Maybe we don't understand what it's like to live the way you do now. But we just wanted to see you. I stood there, the weight of her words pressing down on me. You don't have to check on me. I'm fine, I said quickly, but the words felt hollow as soon as I spoke them. I wasn't fine. I hadn't been fine since they left. Grandpa finally spoke, his voice steady but full of the wisdom that only years of living could bring. We didn't come here to make you feel guilty. We came to remind you that no matter how big your life gets, you always have a place with us. But it's up to you to decide if you want that. I opened my mouth, but no words came out. The guilt hit me like a tidal wave, crashing against the walls I had so carefully built. They weren't angry anymore. They weren't demanding anything from me. They had come here to remind me that family wasn't something to be tossed aside for a business, no matter how important it seemed in the moment. Grandma gave me a small, knowing smile. We know you're trying to make something of yourself, sweetie. We're proud of you for that. But don't let it cost you everything that matters. I stood there, frozen, as they turned to leave. And as I watched them walk down the hallway, a thought hit me. I didn't have to choose between them and my business. I could have both. I just needed to stop building walls and start making space for the people who truly mattered. The next day, I made the hardest decision I had made in a long time. I logged into my Airbnb account and started canceling the upcoming bookings. I didn't cancel all of them, just the ones that felt like too much. I couldn't keep pretending that everything was fine, that the business I had built could fill the emptiness in my life. I picked up the phone and called my parents. I expected a cold response, but when they answered, I could hear the uncertainty in their voices. I need to talk to you, I said, trying to steady myself. We know, my mom replied softly. We've been waiting for you to come to us. I exhaled, relieved. I made a mistake, I admitted. I got caught up in all of this, and I pushed you all away. I need to make things right. We talked for a long time, longer than I had expected. My mom and dad didn't judge me. They didn't lecture me. They just listened, and we worked through what had happened. After that conversation, I picked up the phone again, this time calling Grandma and Grandpa. Hey, it's me, I said nervously, pacing the apartment. I've been thinking a lot, and I want to apologize for how I acted. I didn't mean to shut you out. I'm sorry. There was a long pause before Grandma finally spoke. Sweetheart, we're not upset anymore. We just wanted you to know that we're here for you. You don't have to carry the weight of everything on your own. That was all I needed to hear. We made plans to meet up soon, and the next time I saw them, it felt like a weight had been lifted. I had made the first step toward healing, not just with them, but within myself. It wasn't easy, and I knew it wouldn't be perfect. But as I sat in the living room with my grandparents, laughing at their stories and realizing how much I had missed this, I felt something I hadn't in a long time. Peace. I could have both. Family and business. But it was up to me to find the balance. And for the first time in a while, I felt like I was on the right path again. The weeks that followed felt like a slow, steady return to balance. I still had my business, still ran the Airbnb, and kept the space as efficient as I could, but it no longer consumed me. The bookings slowed down a little, but I didn't mind. I started to see the value in having time for family, for real connection, instead of just filling my days with transactions and tasks. My relationship with my parents mended quickly after our conversation. There were no more awkward silences, no more guilt hanging in the air. We found a way to communicate openly, to be there for each other without expectation. And, of course, I reconnected with Grandma and Grandpa. I hadn't realized how much I missed them until I spent time with them again. The simple things, like sitting on the porch listening to Grandpa's stories about the past or watching Grandma make her famous apple pie, filled a space inside me that had been empty for too long. I had spent so much time chasing success and independence that I had forgotten the value of the people who had shaped me. One afternoon, Grandma came by to visit, her hands full of freshly baked treats. She smiled warmly as I opened the door, a soft laugh escaping her lips as she saw the room I'd carefully organized for them. It was no longer just a room for guests, it was a room that felt like home again. "This place looks so much warmer now," she said, looking around the space, her eyes twinkling. "I'm glad to see you making it your own in more ways than one." I smiled, feeling a sense of peace settle in my chest. "Yeah, it's different now." I realized that it's not just about making a living. It's about making a life. We spent the afternoon together, talking, baking, and laughing just like we had before. I hadn't realized how much I'd missed that. One evening, I sat on the couch, scrolling through my Airbnb listings. For the first time in a while, I didn't feel pressure to fill every day with a new guest. I didn't need to constantly be busy to prove something to myself. I was learning to slow down, to be more intentional with the way I spent my time. A message came through on my phone, another booking request. But this time, I didn't rush to accept it. I paused, thinking. The balance was important now. Family and business had to coexist, not clash. I hit accept on the booking, but something was different. I was no longer focused on filling every vacancy. I was focused on the quality of the moments I had of the time with my family, the space I was creating, and the guests who would experience it as something more than just a place to sleep. In the weeks that followed, I made a conscious effort to keep my personal relationships as my priority. I started spending more weekends with my grandparents, going on trips with my parents, and inviting friends over to the apartment, something I'd avoided for too long. The apartment didn't feel like just a business anymore, it felt like a home again. The balance wasn't perfect, and I knew it wouldn't always be easy. But I realized something important. Success isn't just about what you achieve, it's about who you share it with, and for the first time, I felt like I had both, an independent life, a thriving business, and the people who mattered most. I smiled as I looked out the window, thinking of the next chapter. Whatever came next, I knew I was ready. Life wasn't about choosing between family and business. It was about finding the space to let both grow, side by side. And that was the real success.